Hey classes, welcome back. I will try and keep it to the old 10-minute time limit today, but no guarantees. There's a lot to cover, and I'll try and get it in as fast as I can. But if you look at the board behind me, this was the brain pop that we started off with in class today. The notes are out there, and I'll go through the notes on each side here in just a second. But let's jump right in, and we started in class today talking about the San Jose flea market of all things. As a personal story, I was talking to the students a little bit about bacterial infection. I had a small bacterial infection. It was very, very annoying. And when I was prescribed some penicillin for it, and when I was prescribed a painkiller for it, both of those things come into what we're learning here. So I was starting with a personal story to hopefully kind of illustrate where it is that we're going with learning about bacteria, learning about viruses, pathogens, and all the things that going forward will help you out with your health for your entire life. I cannot stress enough that here and in your PE classes, across the way there, when you do your PE classes, they do a great job of talking about types of things with viruses, sexually transmitted diseases, things like that that are going to help you not just in 7th grade, not just to pass a test in 7th grade and 8th grade, but really, literally, for the rest of your life. I cannot stress that enough because I'm very passionate about making sure that we all understand this. And when you're first learning this, when you look at the standards, this is when we begin to teach it. And when you're first learning the things that are in our standards, I remember very clearly being in 7th grade, 8th grade, middle school, like, oh my goodness, they were talking about sexually transmitted diseases and things today. And at first, if it seems uncomfortable for anyone, that's okay. But I did realize, and everyone will going forward a couple of years from now, it was incredibly important in terms of just knowing what you're talking about, knowing how to keep yourself and partners and your friends safe. So here we go, let's jump on in. And we started talking again about the San Jose flea market because, as an example of something that popped up in the news a little while ago, about 2 years ago, there are some people at the San Jose flea market. If you don't know what a flea market is, you can kind of think of it as like a bunch of little garage sales that all get together in one place. People were selling some prescription drugs that they may not have finished, and they thought, well, I could get rid of this prescription drug, or maybe I could sell it. Now remember, you're not supposed to, of course, ever give away or sell prescription drugs. But as my own personal example, for this tooth ear thing I had going on, the penicillin, which we'll get to in a second, took care of an infection. But I was also prescribed, for example, a painkiller. Now, I ended up never taking it. I thought, this is really annoying, it really hurts, they gave me a painkiller, never even opened the bottle. And now, the thing I'll do when I get home is I'll take that and we'll bring it back to the pharmacy and they will dispose of it properly. It's important that these things don't go into our environment, and when it gets disposed of properly, that means it won't enter the water system and it won't enter, for example, if you flush it down a toilet, it won't enter into the waste system. Unfortunately, the San Jose flea market, not only were people taking some things, just a few people, but it's one thing that really has to be stopped because they were selling things like prescription drugs, painkillers, but also selling things like penicillins. Now, when you look at penicillin and trying to say, hey, I'm feeling better, I think I'll sell the rest of this prescription. We're going to talk a little bit about evolution, about mutations, and why that's such a bad idea. Check out this scene right here, and it's on the board over there in a second. The Tim and Moba that we showed is up here too for a moment because we want to talk about where all the things that we're learning bump up against social policy, and that will bump up against the things I don't have an answer for you. In other words, this is the part where you really have to start thinking for yourself. You're young adults, and this is where you're going forward, going to be making the policies that help us all in the future. So, if you think of these little circles like bacteria, bacteria, when conditions are right, can reproduce in as quickly as 20 minutes. If you get prescribed something, let's just start with strep throat, Streptococcus bacilli. You have a strep throat. If you've ever had strep throat, you probably would remember it. It's quite painful. I've only had it one time in my life and don't want it again. It's a very, very painful sore throat. If you're prescribed penicillin for it, think about the word. We break down words a lot in biology classes. An antibiotic. Anti against, biotic, a living organism. Penicillin, remember Fleming, go back on your notes if you don't, Fleming accidentally discovering that penicillin worked against bacteria. In this case right here, after a couple of days of these Streptococcus bacilli reproducing in your throat, it's very, very painful. So you take an antibiotic prescribed by a doctor, and she might say, hey, make sure that you finish the entire bottle. Why do they say that? Well, after 2 or 3 days, you're feeling better. And you might say, well, gosh, I'm feeling better. You know what? I probably don't need to take the rest of this bottle. I'm just going to get rid of it. In the case of flea market sales, people are like, well, hey, I've got these extra pills. Maybe I can sell them to somebody. Here's the problem. Here's where you run into evolution and mutations. Go back on your notes about mutations, the random changes in the DNA that can happen occasionally, that do happen occasionally, when cells reproduce. In the case of a bacteria, if one single bacteria or a few bacteria just happen to have a mutation, again, a random change in their DNA that makes them a little more resistant to the antibiotic that you've been prescribed, then yes, you might have killed most of the bacteria. You might be feeling better, but if you don't finish your prescription, those few bacteria that can remain will start to reproduce again. You'll feel lousy again in a couple of days. You'll have a resurgence of strep throat. But also, you will have helped in creating a more antibiotic-resistant strain of that bacteria. This is one of the things we're bumping up against. A lot of antibiotics that used to work wonderfully for bacterial infections aren't working as well as they used to. Sometimes doctors have to prescribe many rounds of antibiotics to try and nail the particular strain that you have. We also run into this in the book Silent Spring, and this happens on a big scale too. For example, mosquitoes. Say you spray some kind of chemical that kills almost every mosquito. Great, you've killed a vector for a lot of pathogens, but if there's just a few mosquitoes that survive the chemical that you sprayed, guess what? They can then give to the next generation their genetic code. In other words, they can pass on their resistance. That's really the heart of evolution. That's why yesterday I had on my notes that mutations are the heart of evolution, of what we're talking about in this class. Moving on to, in the public policy debate, we talked about HIV. Our brain pop today was about human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. And when you're talking about HIV, the analogy that I've given, and again, I'll get to these notes over here in just a second. I used to use this analogy for a couple of years now, and I think it's very apt in terms of when you think about the acquired and innate immune system that we have. As soon as things invade our body, I can guarantee that whomever's watching this, your body has been assaulted by several pathogens trying to look for a home in or on you today, and your immune system has kicked them out of there. Well, if you think of the immune system as like the police force of your body, the Pacifica Police Force does a great job of protecting the Pacifica community. Let's say you're at home and some bad guys are breaking into your house. If you have HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, this virus goes directly after your immune system, a person's immune system. And it would be a little bit like being at home and having some bad guys break in. And so you pick up your phone, you call 911, you say, hey, Pacifica Police, can you get over here and help me out? Someone's breaking into my house. And it would be like the Pacifica Police saying, hey, we'd like to help right now, but right now someone's breaking into the police department. We have to deal with that. So you're on your own. The point being, once HIV is introduced, what can happen is the immune system all of a sudden can't ramp up a defense against what we call, quote unquote, simple infections, the kind of things, the kind of pathogens that we're exposed to each and every day. And then where this bumps up against public policy, and again, I don't have the answers for this. This is for you young people. You're at an age now where you're starting to develop your own thoughts, your own ideas, your policies that will someday, in a very, very short time, you'll be the ones who are leading the society. You have to think about these things. Intravenous drug use is one place where HIV can be spread. If unfortunately, for whatever reason, a person is deciding to use illegal drugs with a hypodermic needle. Now, you may or may not be aware that hypodermic needles are really like little tiny hollow tubes, and they always have, after you use them, a little bit of blood left in them. For example, when I got my flu shot a little while ago up on this arm, they have, if you've ever noticed, a retractable needle. It's a one-use thing. They put it into a medical disposal bucket, never used again on anybody else. Unfortunately, some people who are using illegal drugs might share needles among themselves. And they say, well, if there's a little bit of blood left in there, and I don't mind that the board went to sleep there for a second, there's a little bit of blood left in there, what can happen then is if another person then uses that needle, you can possibly transmit HIV. Some people say, well, let's give the people who are using intravenous drugs clean needles to do the injections. Other people are saying, well, yeah, that'll stop some HIV transmission, but wait a second, I don't want my tax dollars going to fund a person's intravenous drug habit. What's the right answer? What's the right thing to do? Again, I'm not here to tell you. That's for you to determine. Those are the debates in society. What you run up to against in this class is the science. In other words, what we're trying to give you are the tools to understand these issues better. We're watching a tiny bit, not the whole thing, but a bit of a clip from the movie Contagion. We'll get to that in a second, but there's some excellent scenes where they bump up against public policy versus science. The character that was introduced today, played by Kate Winslet, the actress, Dr. Mears. There's a fantastic scene. I only used about 20 minutes from this whole movie, but there's a fantastic scene where she's trying to talk with a couple of people in the health department about this is what's going to happen. She's giving them the facts, and again, it's up to the public officials to decide, hey, what do we do with this information? You 7th graders who are watching this video, you lived through this. You saw this in your 5th grade year when we were online learning, most likely. And when you are looking at what we're learning in this class, it's uncanny the parallels. It's uncanny how many things the 2011 movie Contagion got correct about what would happen should a pandemic arise. Also, a lot of the students are saying this is now the Matt Damon science class, because just by chance, I did use most of the movie The Martian. I'm just using a few clips from here. It's been used, this particular movie gets used in a lot of high schools, by the way. And the Matt Damon just happens to be the main character in both. So everyone's getting used to seeing Matt Damon on the screen in here. All right, moving on here. We had our brain pop notes here on HIV. Again, making the police force analogy, it's like a virus that attacks the cells that are there to protect you in the first place. This right here, where we're talking about the importance of making sure that you finish a round of antibiotics. That's incredibly important when you're talking about making sure that you get every last one of those, because as we'll see when we come back from break, antibiotic resistance is and will continue to be a huge problem in trying to fight bacterial infections. And then finally, the last bit of the notes, let me switch the screens here. And as I'm switching the screens, I'll say that the students have for homework a color-in sheet, one of those bacteria color-in sheets that is designed to go through these 3 main types or shapes of bacteria: the spherical, the rod-like, and the spirals. The spherical, Streptococcus bacilli, right there. You've got, if you've had strep throat, you've had this type in your body, taking up residence in your throat. And the scene that we saw today, basically almost the last scene in the movie. We only saw 10 minutes at the beginning of the movie, about 10 minutes today, and then we're going to do just 10 more minutes tomorrow, and that's about it. That's all we're using from Contagion. But in the movie, they talk about a very important number, the R naught number. And this is a number that has to do with how many people are likely to get an infection once one person has it. In other words, you want an R naught below 1 if possible when you're trying to knock out an infection from the community. For example, if 100 people have an infection and they spread it, and more than 100 people get it from those original 100, that would be an R naught of above 1. What you're looking for is to get that R naught number below 1, so that means that there's fewer and fewer people getting the infection. Also, and I know it's a little grim, sorry, but the mortality rate in the movie originally, in the movie Contagion, at one point they mentioned 2 out of 10 people, 10 suspected cases, 2 fatalities. That would be a mortality rate of 20%. Simple division there, deaths over cases. The mortality rate is how many people, when they get a virus or any pathogen, are expected to die from it. There are some with incredibly high mortality rates. For example, at one time or another, while rescuing a stray cat, I got bit by this very, very scraggly-looking cat. It was suspected of having rabies, and I thought, gosh, do I need a rabies shot? Now, I teach this, and I knew I probably did, but I called and I talked to the doctor just to make sure. He says, well, you know, as a science teacher, that this particular virus, rabies, has a mortality rate of almost 100%. That means, he said, if you don't come in and get your rabies shot, then instead of coming in for a shot tomorrow, I'll be sending you to the mortuary. I'm like, ow, okay, I will go up for my rabies shot. They didn't tickle, but I'm glad I did get it because it was a very, very high mortality rate for rabies. You can look it up for yourself. We talked about prions the other day, mad cow disease. That is a very, very high mortality rate. Not quite a virus. It's a protein that gets misfolded. We'll talk about that. I put up there on the board yesterday for completeness. And then finally, one of the things that we'll see on tomorrow's Brain Pop is Ebola. The mortality rate there is around 50%. Mortality means about 50% of the people that get Ebola currently, unfortunately, will not survive it. Ebola doesn't spread as easily as COVID-19. COVID-19, when it hit, when it came on the scene, the reason we closed the schools, the reasons we had all the precautions, the reason we're still wearing masks around school is because it was, as Dr. Fauci said, kind of a perfect storm. If you know what the perfect storm reference is, it was a lot of unfortunate things came together at once. It was a respiratory virus, which means it could simply be inhaled and catch it that way. Also, it had a long, what we call incubation period. That means you could have it and transmit it for a very long time before you actually start showing symptoms. And when you check out in the movie the word fomites, fomites are the way that you can transmit a virus simply by touching the surface and then touching your eyes, touching your nose. Now, in the case of COVID-19, it looks like it's more transmitted through respiratory, through breathing in the particles. But in the case of, for example, the common cold, if you were in here this class, say second period, and somebody who had a cold sneezed on a desk, you've got a virus particle. Remember, a virus in and of itself isn't alive. It's sitting on the desk right there. But that's why antibiotics do not work against a virus. However, you've got somebody who touches that virus and then immediately touches their eyes, touches their nose. You've now introduced a rhinovirus directly into your eyes, your nose, the place where it will take up residence and start to multiply, take over your cells, and try and replicate itself as many times as possible before your body's immune systems kick it out. All right, that's about it for today. Please look for the notes online. Don't forget, this week we've got our usual online quiz. If you missed any of the previous 2 quizzes, this is one of our 4 also this week. That is an optional makeup that'll be out there again online. Have yourself a great Thanksgiving break. I'll probably see you at least one more time on a video, and make sure that you have an updated notebook with the, hold on, here it is, this little coloring right here that shows, whoops, upside down, that shows the bacteria shapes and how quickly bacteria can multiply given the right conditions. Have a great day. Talk to you later.